Tuned in to watch this with Eryk and Brandon on Giant TV. I'm Eryk.
I'm Brandon.
And this is the show where we make a friend watch a movie or TV show they've never seen before. What do they think? Is their opinion the same as yours? That is what we find out. And on today's episode, Brandon and I are going to be discussing Citizen Kane. Very legendary movie. I've seen it many, many times. Brandon just watched it for the first time the other day, so we'll get Brandon's reaction as a first-time viewer. You know, some of my thoughts as somebody who's seen it many times. We'll also discuss our favorite scenes and where does this movie rank amongst the best movies of all time.
And we want to say spoiler alert
That's right.
because we are going to be discussing the movie. So if you haven't seen it, go and watch it. Come back and watch this podcast and enjoy.
Exactly. We'll be here. So go watch the movie and come back later. We'll be here and see if your opinions are the same.
So let's start with the background of Orson Welles, the director and star of the movie.
Right.
He's legendary.
Legendary.
He's worked in theater, radio, film. He kind of did a little bit of everything over his life. And he's remembered for his innovative work in all three, in theater, as I said, radio, and as well as film. So the first one he did was Caesar. He did the Julius Caesar play back in 1937.
And that was a part of the Mercury Theater, which is a theater company that he started in New York and really was popular. And like you said, they had these productions like Caesar that were really, really popular, getting good reviews, and everybody wanted to see him. And so he was kind of courted by Hollywood for a while. And then he did a very famous radio play.
Yes, War of the Worlds.
Right.
That was in 1938. And then afterwards he went in and did Citizen Kane.
That's right. Because people in Hollywood were just like, we need to get this guy.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, he's killing it in the theater world. He had that huge radio program that really got a lot of attention, a lot of controversy as well. So they basically said, hey, Orson, if you ever want to do anything, come on down here and you can make a movie. And RKO Radio Pictures is who eventually let him make a movie. And that became Citizen Kane, first movie ever. And actually, funny, we watched American Pie last week. And I didn't think there'd be anything in common with American Pie and Citizen Kane, but actually one thing that they do have in common is that a lot of the actors in Citizen Kane were new to movies.
Yeah, they had never acted before, right? At all
in movies.
Or they'd been on stage.
They'd been in the Mercury Theater, but
right.
They hadn't been in movies before. And Orson Welles had never directed, never produced, never starred, never written a movie, and so he was completely new to the whole process. And well, they did a pretty good job.
And they gave him a blank slate. They said, "Here's a check. You use whatever money you want, however much." And the budget actually wasn't in that time. It was $839,000.
Yeah.
And it didn't actually end up recouping its cost from the movie. They didn't make the money back originally.
Which is funny to think, but there's a number of reasons for that, and a lot of it stems from some of the controversies, because the movie, in part, is based on a few guys, but really based on kind of one man in particular, and that is William Randolph Hearst. I mean, the similarities between Charles Foster Kane, the character in the movie, and William Randolph Hearst are huge, because, you know, Hearst was a newspaper magnate, just like Kane was, and a very wealthy guy, and in the tabloids a lot. Like, he had a tabloid newspaper, but he was also making news himself a lot, and there's a lot of parallels there. And so when somebody told him, you know, hey, this movie Citizen Kane that's coming out, it's clearly based on
It's you, yeah.
He
did not like that. No. And he prohibited them from mentioning it in the newspaper at all, in any of his stuff, right?
So in any of his papers, and also bribed some studios in Hollywood, not just RKO Pictures, but bribed a lot of the studios in Hollywood and said, hey, if this movie, Citizen Kane, gets released, I am going to run smear campaigns against your actors, against your directors. He's like, hey, look, we know you're not angels down there in Hollywood. So he pretty much said, you know, I want this movie gone. And so it was released in May of 1941, and it kind of went away. That's why it didn't recoup its cost, because it just went away.
And you talk about how he bribed people and stuff like that, and we bring up the Oscars, right? They got 9 nominations,
and it should have,
for Oscar awards, and it only won 1 for best screenplay, which is surprising because it was so well done. I mean, it could have won several awards.
It probably could have won for best editing at least. I mean, best directing. I mean, what an incredible movie it was. And yeah, only 1 Oscar, and a lot of it had to do with that controversy. So what did the critics think of it, right? Because, you know, some people saw it before it came out, and some people had opinions on it. Critics absolutely love this movie. In fact, we were talking about Metacritic last week, and I think American Pie got, what, 58 out of 100? Yeah, Citizen Kane, it's a little different. 100 out of 100 from
Yeah,
critics.
and that's all critics.
Absolutely.
Speaking.
The fans, IMDb users, gave it an 8.3 out of 10. So I think it's just because it's not as watchable as some modern movies.
And it's an old
maybe.
movie.
It's an
That's
old
it,
movie.
right? People aren't
So-
as interested maybe as they would be in a newer movie these days.
Absolutely. But eventually it did come back into the theaters in the mid-50s. It did start to circulate again, and people started to see it. And that's really, you know, from the mid-50s to now is really when it started to kind of gain its reputation as being this legendary, iconic movie. And you had never seen it before.
I'd never seen it.
One thing we want to do on every episode here is kind of get our prediction. You know, going into a movie that one of us has never seen before, what do you think this movie is going to be about?
So basically, I didn't really know what it was
Right.
going to be about, to be honest. I didn't do any research on the movie at all. All I knew is it was going to be about the life of a rich guy, and that was about it. That was all I could come up with, because I didn't know. I didn't have any background of the movie whatsoever, and it's not typically a movie that I would watch. So that's the point of the show altogether, right?
Obviously,
So
yep.
after seeing it, I did find a new appreciation for classic film.
Well, here is the question that's on everybody's mind. What did you think of the movie?
I enjoyed it.
Oh, you
Thoroughly
did?
enjoyed it. Yeah. Well,
There's a
that's the
win.
thing. And I noticed a lot of things that we see in movies today, too,
Yeah.
which is interesting. You see in how the old movies are similar to some of the stuff that we see today in film.
I have to say, this is a particularly good example of a movie from the early 40s where it is very modern looking. I mean, you know, we were talking about the Oscars. The movie that won Best Picture at the 1941 Oscars, it's so boring. I watched like 10 minutes of
You
it.
tried to get through it and you couldn't, right?
Yeah, Citizen Kane is a particularly good example of a modern feeling movie from this time period.
And when you're not used to watching old movies, you don't really know what to expect. And I think the oldest movie I've seen was from the 70s.
Oh,
I
really?
mean, I saw The Wizard of Oz, maybe. That's
Okay.
the,
Well,
that's
that was
the only
older than
other,
this.
Well, yeah, I know.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's probably the only other old movie that I've seen. And
Okay.
I like the dialogue in the movie. It was well written.
Right.
The story was good. The acting was really good.
Fantastic.
And the way they presented the story through the flashbacks, I enjoyed that. It wasn't hard to follow. It was an easy story to understand. And I constantly found myself asking, what's going to happen next? Like, where's this going? Who's Rosebud? Like,
Yeah.
and then that's another thing that we'll talk about.
Now, that's interesting because for so many people, I think the Rosebud thing, that has been spoiled before
Yeah.
a lot of people have watched. Even if they've never seen the movie, have no idea what the rest of the plot is about. I think a lot of people have heard of Rosebud and maybe heard of the sled and all that kind
Right.
of stuff. And so it's interesting that even though you probably had heard that before, right?
I didn't know what it was.
You didn't know what it
I had
was?
heard it,
Okay.
though, obviously, yes. But I had no idea what to think of it.
Right.
So, and I liked the fact that even in the 40s there was gossip newspapers. Like
Yeah,
they've got
the
the
tabloids.
National Enquirer today and all these trash magazines, and even back then they had that. So that was pretty cool.
You could draw a lot of parallels with today's world and Citizen Kane. I mean, we're talking about fake news, right? And all this kind of stuff. I mean, there is a lot of modern themes, and I think people in 2019 could watch this movie and it's still somewhat relatable.
And the story's told through the reporter going through and talking to old acquaintances and lovers of Kane and ex-wives and stuff like that. And you never see his face.
Yeah.
And you kind of it's one of those things where you just wonder who he is. Who's this
Right.
reporter and what's he doing?
So why do you think they did that? Why do you think you never see Thompson's face?
Well, I thought at first that maybe it was his son, but then I was like, okay, well, that can't be because his name is Thompson.
Right.
So I didn't really. I don't know how to put it. Is it looking at it from his life, maybe Kane's life, him looking back and think it's him. How do I put this? Him reflecting in a way, in a sense, him in his younger years, maybe trying to figure himself out.
Yeah.
That could be. I don't know. What do you think?
I think Thompson is, I think, meant to represent us in a lot of ways, right? Us going on this journey of who is this guy Kane and what does Rosebud mean? Well, we want to find out.
Yeah.
And he's kind of us, going to all these different places, talking to all these people. I mean, the movie is told from so many different perspectives. I mean, we get, Jedediah and Susan's and Bernstein's perspective all through this movie, and he's kind of the one who's sitting there listening, and he represents us, and I think that's why we never see his face. And even at the end, when he has his only real monologue of the movie, the camera's pulling away. It's getting further away, and he's just off in the distance because, you know, he's gone on that journey for us. He's not really the focus of this movie, and so they just kind of pull away from him.
And he's essentially the main character
in a lot of ways,
right?
Yeah, Jerry Thompson is the main character besides Charles Foster Kane, and so it is interesting that we don't see his face. What did you think about the black and white? Because you said you hadn't watched a lot of movies, and Wizard of Oz
started in black and white, and then
but
it went
it's also
color.
in color,
right?
And so, what did you think about the black and white?
It didn't have effect on me either way.
Okay.
I didn't find myself wondering, like saying, "Oh, black and white, I don't want to watch this," because I enjoyed the movie so much that it didn't matter.
Okay, so you didn't notice
we're
after
so
a
used to
while.
watching colored television and stuff like that, but it didn't. No, it made no difference to me. Being an old film, I knew it was going to be black and white, so it didn't matter. I like how they made clear that he lived his life the way he wanted to live his life at the expense of his relationships and everything else. I thought that was really good. And overall, I enjoyed the movie, and I would recommend for someone to watch it and understand why it's placed. I understand why it's placed as one of the greatest movies of all time.
Now that you've seen it, that's for sure. And actually, one thing before we move on to my reaction to it as somebody who's seen it many times, I did want to ask, because one of the first things you pointed out when the movie started was, is that just a drawn-in background?
Yeah,
the movie?
That's right. They didn't have the budget to make these big, huge they showed the mansion that he lived in, and it's this big, massive production, right? And obviously they're not gonna. But I did notice the background very early on.
Now, did that take away from it, or did you think that it was effective in making Xanadu this massive, amazing thing?
I think they did a good job of it, because when they opened up the movie, they kind of went through and showed different areas. They showed the golf course, they showed the zoo, they showed the mansion, and just how big this place was, and they really set that up well, I think. Yeah, it didn't affect the how I thought of the movie. No.
Now, I've seen this movie many times. And actually, the first time I saw it was in high school. I took a film class in high school, and I admittedly did not appreciate it at the time because, and you know, it's funny, like at the time I was like, okay, I'm a dumb high school kid.
You're young.
Yeah, I was like, I can't appreciate this yet. So I bought a copy of the movie immediately because I was like, I want to be a film buff.
I want to learn about this. I want to know everything about it. Exactly.
I want to know why this is considered such a great movie. And so I bought a copy of the movie, and I've watched it probably 6 or 7 times to this day, and there's so many things about it that I absolutely love, like doing a deeper dive on some of the technical aspects of it. Greg Toland was the guy who was the cinematographer in this movie, and he was already a known guy. Like we talked earlier about how Orson Welles and some of the other people from the Mercury Theater, they were coming into this without any film experience at all. And so Orson Welles kind of made a list of people who he wanted to work with, right? And Greg Toland was #1 on his list of cinematographers. He was already an Oscar-winning cinematographer before this movie even began shooting, right?
Yeah.
And so obviously Orson Welles is like, I want to work with that guy.
Yeah. So what made him want to work with Orson Welles?
Well, that's what Orson Welles said.
Yeah. Why does he want to work with me?
Right, because Greg Toland ultimately said, yeah, I'll do that movie. And he's like, why? Like, I mean, good. But why?
Yeah.
And a lot of it had to do with, you know, all these other experienced directors, they had their minds made up about what they wanted in terms of cinematography, all this kind of stuff.
They were going to do it their way.
Right.
And there was no one going to tell them what to do.
And so he wanted to just, he said, look, if you let me be the cinematographer, just leave me alone. We'll do cool things, right? I mean, like, let me have my vision. And so Orson Welles, in a lot of ways, his ignorance about movie making made this movie great because he allowed Greg Toland to just
and it's
do
a
what he
big part of
wanted.
the reason why it is one of the best movies of all time, right?
Exactly.
Because it was just go ahead.
Yeah, and what's cool is, you know, a lot of people associate certain things about filmmaking with this movie, although it's funny, it didn't really innovate anything. It just kind of popularized a lot of things. Like one thing that I pointed out to you while we were watching is deep focus, which is where pretty much everything in the frame is totally in focus, and they use that to great effect.
There's a lot of that in there.
Yeah, and some really great moments, like when they're in the cabin, when he's a kid, when Kane is a kid, and his mom and Thatcher are having that conversation.
Big, serious conversation, and it pans out, and you can see everything, You
could see him in the background playing in the snow. His dad is saying, like, why are you signing him away? And his mom and Thatcher are having this conversation. They're all in focus.
Yeah.
And That's really effective. And Toland had actually done that in a previous movie. So this wasn't the first movie he did that in, but he used it a lot in this movie, really to great effect. And I think the reason why Orson Welles really liked that is because it was almost like theater, right? When three actors are on stage, one actor is not blurry.
You see everybody.
Yeah, they're all there, right? And so I think that was almost kind of a theater trick in a lot of ways, and very, very effective. Another thing was shooting from a low enough angle that you could see a ceiling.
I remember you saying that because that was not a common thing that they did back in that time. Right. You never saw ceiling in a shot. Like, why? Right. What would be the point of that, right? But then they put it in, and I like the fact how the one scene when they were, it was in the camera was obviously in the floor, and they were shooting up, and it made them look larger than life.
And that's a lot of the reasons why they did it, is because Kane is supposed to be this figure who's just, this one of the richest men in the world, and he just runs everybody, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's a lot of the reason why. It's, you see him from this angle and he looks like he's this massive guy. And again, wasn't the first movie to do that. I think Stagecoach 1939 was the first movie where you saw a ceiling.
Oh, okay.
But again, it used it a lot. I mean, a lot of the scenes were from that low angle looking up. And there's a great photo of Orson Welles and Greg Toland. They literally are in the floor. Like, they cut a hole in the floor. They're both looking through the camera, and it's like dramatically tilted upwards. And they really did that a lot. And it's an interesting technique. Editing. Robert Wise is the guy who edited this movie. I mentioned earlier when we were talking about the Oscars, this could have won for editing, and probably should have. I mean, incredible stuff. You and I both really love the scene where Kane and his first wife are at the dinner table,
and they're flashing through his life, basically. Well, not his life, but like over a period of time with his wife, and things are increasingly getting worse and worse. She's less and less impressed every time, and it was brilliant
editing there. You talked about the flashbacks, how you really like that it jumps from one point in his life to another.
I like that in storytelling in movies when they do different scenes like that. That's the one thing that that really stood out to me.
Yeah, non-linear editing, again, another thing they didn't pioneer, right? A lot of European movies at the time had done stuff like that, but used it to great effect in this movie. And the sound. I mean, obviously, we talked about Orson Welles having a radio background. He used sound incredibly in this movie. They couldn't afford, like you said, to build Xanadu, this massive mansion. So how do you make a room sound this big? Well, one way you do it is by putting the biggest fireplace I've ever seen.
He can walk right into the fireplace.
Exactly. Yeah. But another way is to use echo.
That echo was something.
Just incredible. The use of echo when they're talking to each other and they have to raise their voice to talk louder to each other.
Yelling across the room.
Yeah, exactly. And just an incredible use of sound, cinematography. I mean, there's so many great things about this movie, but is it a perfect movie?
Is it perfect? What do you think?
Well, obviously, this is a subjective thing. My definition of a movie that is perfect means the movie has no fat on it. In other words, you can't cut anything out of the movie and you can't add anything to it, or else it'll make it worse, right? As it stands, this movie works the way it does, and great performances and all that. So that is my definition of just like a perfect movie. I don't think Citizen Kane is a perfect movie. And I think a lot of that has to do with, Orson Welles' ignorance, coming in.
Because he didn't know what he was doing. Well, I shouldn't say he didn't know what he was doing, but he'd
never done it before.
Yeah, he had never done that, yeah.
And I think in a lot of ways, that's what makes it sort of charming, right? There are things in here that, maybe don't need to be, and there's some things that they could have changed here and there, but I don't know. That kind of adds to the charm for me. There are movies that I think are perfect movies, and maybe we'll talk about them later. I want to throw one out because I think you've seen it. Silence of the Lambs.
Oh, yes.
See, to me, and maybe that's a hot take, I don't know, but Silence of the Lambs, I think, is a perfect movie because you can't take anything out without ruining it, right? I mean, it throws everything off if you take even one scene out of that movie. The performances are incredible. Of course, Jonathan Demme, the late Jonathan Demme, one of the great directors. So I think that is a perfect movie. I don't know that Citizen Kane is. However, for innovation and all this kind of stuff, obviously ranks among the best of all time. And in fact, while we're on that topic, where does this movie rank among the greatest of all time? Another subjective topic, because how do you decide what's the best, right? I mean, to some people, Citizen Kane is the best, but to some people, Lethal Weapon is the best. Both people are right? Nobody's wrong here. So how do you decide? American Film Institute 11 years ago, 12 years ago now, they put out their list of the top 100 movies celebrating their 100th anniversary. Number 1, Citizen Kane.
Yeah.
Number 2, The Godfather. Casablanca was 3rd. By the way, I'm going to make you watch Casablanca.
Never seen that one either.
But you and I have both seen now Citizen Kane and The Godfather.
Yes.
Numbers 1 and 2 on the list. So I'm interested to know, which one would you put at number 1?
Over those two?
Yeah.
That's a tough one. I think The Godfather at number 1, only because of the stars in it.
Right.
Al Pacino. You had Brando, James Caan, everybody. I just think that, to me, I enjoyed The Godfather more. Yeah. I mean, I'm not the American Film Institute, obviously, right. but I would put Godfather ahead of Citizen Kane.
I would agree with that.
Yeah,
and I think one of the reasons why is because it looks incredible. Right, the cinematography is great. I mean, the lighting is so low; it almost looks like a painting when you're watching The Godfather, and the acting performances are great. But even though it is kind of an artsy, it's a really great looking movie, it's also a good movie.
Yeah.
Like, not that Citizen Kane isn't. Citizen Kane is a great movie, but The Godfather, it has quotable lines. It has all these stars, as you say, and it's just, I don't know. There's something about Godfather that is so watchable. And Citizen Kane, I think for most people, let's say somebody who loves Die Hard or Lethal Weapon or something, if that's your favorite movie, you might not enjoy Citizen Kane.
Exactly.
But you might enjoy The Godfather.
Yeah, and Citizen Kane was groundbreaking.
Yes.
As it was. And the first will always be the best.
Right.
Right? So, I mean, that's what I took away from it. It was a legitimately enjoyable movie.
Sure. Yeah,
So, but I still think Godfather would be number 1.
Yeah, I do too. And I think we've reached a point where, most people would have that opinion. Godfather should be number 1. I think Citizen Kane should be in the
top
second
5,
or third spot.
Yeah, anyway, well, okay, yeah.
I'm going to make you watch Casablanca, and we'll see
if I enjoy that one.
Yeah, if you enjoy that one, if you think that should be even higher than either of those movies. Now, we have been talking about Citizen Kane this whole time, and there's a lot of great moments in this movie that we've kind of briefly mentioned. Do you have a favorite scene from
I have
this movie?
couple favorite scenes, actually. So I really enjoyed the opening part of the movie when after he died, he dropped the snow globe, and then they played the newsreel of his life. I thought that was so cool.
Yeah.
The way that they went through, basically, they didn't, without telling the whole story, they went through and showed exactly who he was. And the other one was when he was with, we talked about this earlier, his first wife at the table, and the editing that they did. And they kept showing cuts of their relationship over time. She became more and more fed up with him, and ultimately ending the relationship after some time. So, yeah, those were my favorite parts. How about you?
I mean, those are incredible scenes, and those are scenes that people still talk about to this day. There's one shot in this movie that I didn't mention when I was talking about the cinematography and everything, but one shot that I loved even the first time I saw it is when you go to meet Susan Alexander for the first time. She's in that bar, right? And so they have a big painting of her outside of the bar, like Susan Alexander live, and then they pan up to that sign of hers, and it says the name of the bar and see Susan Alexander, and then the camera goes through the sign.
Something that you had never seen.
Right, and down through glass, and then transitions very seamlessly from 1941 into the bar, and it's just that is studied a lot and kind of baffled my mind when I first saw it. And now I know, they Hollywooded the sign, took it apart, and so the camera just went through and all that. But I don't know, something about practical effects in movies as opposed to CGI. And, these CGI artists and everything are incredibly, incredibly skilled people, really, really talented. But technology has gotten to the point where you could do literally anything. You don't need,
you could just do whatever you want.
And if you have the skills that these people have, you could do anything. And so something about practical effects in a movie, if it can still make you go, I wonder how they did that. I just, to me, that is more impressive. And I always love that. So that is a good scene. I love when they're at Susan Alexander's, the Love Nest.
The Love Nest, yes.
And Jim Geddes is there. It's his political opponent, and Citizen Kane's wife is there, and they're having this argument about Geddes is going to print about the Love Nest in the papers if you don't drop out of the race. And Citizen Kane, Charles Foster Kane, just says, nope. The people love me. I'm going to do what I want.
Very confident.
Very confident. And, well, it turns out didn't work out so well. But I love that scene, and I love when Jim Geddes is walking down the stairs and he's yelling at him, "I'm going to send you to Sing Sing." That to me is just incredible acting. Really, really love that scene. Kane clapping in the opera, which these days is a gif.
Yeah, right? You've told me about it. I've noticed it more since I've seen that, because it's so quiet. No one's really applauding the woman. And
right, because, you know, she's not a great opera singer. And he's the one who's forcing her to be an opera singer, literally builds her a theater to perform opera in, because nobody else will have her. And, you know, the show ends, the people just clap politely, and then it dies down, and he stands up
goes
and just,
crazy. Yeah,
and that to me is a great use of audio again, right? That one lonely clap in this huge theater is just really incredible. When he's a kid, this is another scene we mentioned, when Thatcher and his mom are having that conversation, and he's just out in the background playing, oblivious to what they're talking about. He had no idea.
He's just living his life as a child.
Right, and apparently that's somewhat autobiographical from Orson Welles' life. Apparently, he was orphaned very young, and he had this fortune that was going to be given to him when he was a certain age. And so a banker did kind of become his caretaker, and his name was also Thatcher. But he actually liked the guy, apparently, and in this movie, he really does not like Thatcher. Kane is not a fan of Thatcher. But and also, we mentioned the echo earlier. When Susan Alexander is doing the puzzles by the fireplace, and he's just like yelling from across the room, and you just hear this echo. It's just such a incredible scene, how far away they are, again with the deep focus, with the echo. It's just so incredibly done. I love this movie.
One other thing I want to mention is the scene when he brings all his new editors into the the shot. They're looking at the picture.
They're looking at the writers, right? The newspaper writers.
The writers, right. And it's a picture. Yeah. And then all of a sudden it comes to life. It's the exact same. I thought that was a great shot.
Another one. It's like, how in 1941 did they do it that seamlessly? And
like you wouldn't be able to tell how they edited that. I still don't know.
It's really, really a well-made movie. Again, why is it number one? Well, for all these reasons.
There's many reasons. So, favorite characters. So we get to go there now.
Sure.
Okay, so I'll start with mine. I liked Orson Welles as Charles Foster Kane.
Yeah.
I also liked Jedediah, his partner, when they first came in. The guy was kind of aloof, I guess, and. I liked his character as he was older as well, when they were talking to him in the hospital, and just the way he was. There was something about him. He was a little bit shady. So that was one of mine. That was probably my favorite character.
Yeah, he was an interesting character for sure, and it's interesting. He was kind of like the opposite of Kane, even though they grew up together and were friends for a long time. Just kind of these two opposites, right? And grew apart after time. And I mean, towards the end, when Kane finishes the
bad review,
bad review, and it's just like seems to be done out of spite almost, and just like, and then fires him as he's writing it and all this. It's just their relationship as it progresses is incredible in that movie. And Charles Foster Kane, played by Orson Welles, plays himself in so many different ages, from his current age, which I think Orson Welles was 25 or 26 at the time that they made this movie, all the way up to a guy in his 70s. And I mean, just incredible. Like when he's destroying the room after season leaves, I mean, he's walking around like he's an older man, right? It's just like this performance is so incredible. And so, I mean, really, really amazing performances. I would say Orson Welles, he's got to have the best performance. I mean, it's just so incredibly done. And a lot of these actors, by the way, as we mentioned earlier, were theater actors in the Mercury Theater, and there are some very performances that are a little out there for screen acting that maybe would have been better suited, right? Some of the acting you could say maybe is a little cheesy, but I think for the most part this acting is really, really well done in this
movie.
The
fact of the matter is they weren't movie stars,
right? Exactly. And
that all
that's
ties
a big reason
back
why.
Into that, right?
Yep.
Okay, is it woke?
Is it woke?
Can we watch this movie, or could it be released in 2019
without anything being changed?
With nothing being changed.
Well, there's one moment that kind of stands out, and it's a moment where Charles Foster Kane and Susan Alexander are in the tent, right? All their friends are watching the music being played and having a good time, and they're in the tent having an argument. And Charles strikes her, and obviously that is a thing that nowadays would shock people even now. But then again, I think it does sort of lead to a sort of woke moment, if you will, where the next day, Susan Alexander, she's packed up her bags and she's
out of there.
Yeah,
she hit the road.
Done with the emotional abuse, done with the physical abuse, which we saw, and she's like, "That's it."
So a lot of people would like that. They'd be like empowerment and another thing. Another thing Twitter would comment on is the lack of people of color in the movie.
Yeah, there's no main characters who are people of color. It's all white people. I mean, I think there's a band at one point, actually, in the scene we were just talking about where they're in the tents, there's a band playing, and I think there's some of the musicians are black, and there might be other black people here and there in the movie, but there's no, there really is no diversity in this movie.
Which Hollywood was criticized heavily. They're still criticized for.
Criticized for to this day. At the time, that would have been the norm, obviously, but could this movie be released in 2019 as it is? People would have something to say about that. So, but I think overall, is it woke?
Is it woke?
Sort of.
Yeah.
Kind of.
I think
For
so.
1941, I think it did pretty good.
Yeah. So that's our review of Citizen Kane.
Right.
I enjoyed the movie. I'd never seen it before.
Yeah.
Good job. I enjoyed it.
I think that's a win for film buffs anywhere. If Brandon enjoys the movie, that's a good thing.
Yeah, because I said I'm not used to watching these movies, and to be able to appreciate it, I just thought it was a great movie.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, what are we doing next week?
So next week, this is switching gears totally. So we're gonna watch Ace Ventura: Pet Detective.
Yeah,
he's never seen it before.
I've never seen it, and you know what? This is what's fun about this show, because we could talk about the critically reviewed, well-reviewed movies and these legendary movies, and Ace Ventura.
It's a slapstick comedy.
Right.
I mean, and that's where our tastes in movies differ, and I think that's why. I've seen it. Eryk hasn't seen it. So, what do you think? Or what do you know about the movie?
I know that he's a pet detective, as per the title of the movie. And I know that it's Jim Carrey. I have no idea what the plot is about. I know, knowing Jim Carrey's, body of work, that probably going to be kind of crazy. Yeah, a lot of extreme scenes, a lot of really funny stuff. So I'm expecting this to be funny. And I'm interested to see it, because obviously this is another one that everybody talks about. Yeah. Right.
And they say that, I can't believe you haven't seen this.
Exactly.
So we're going to discuss where it ranks with other Jim Carrey movies as well, because Jim Carrey is a very diverse actor. He can do a lot of stuff too. And so we're going to talk about that, and that'll be next week's episode. So we're going to sign off. Thanks for watching. Thanks to our producers, Joe and Lucas. It's Watch This with Eryk and Brandon. We'll see you next week.